question. Who said just a day ago precisely this? Quote, we believe that $15 an hour is the minimum that anyone in the U.S. should earn for an hour of labor, end quote, and demanded that Congress raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. Now, if you said Bernie Sanders, wrong, of course he does believe this. It was, now wait for this, Amazon, which takes us to one of the most exciting, courageous efforts going on right now. Thousands of workers are trying to get a union at Amazon's huge warehouse in Bessemer, Alabama, and become members of the Retail, Wholesale, and Department Store Union, the RWDSU. It's amazing. Think about it. A win here, the first union at an Amazon warehouse, would be a huge beginning to unionize this gargantuan corporate thug. Not to mention a huge boost and message to everyone that organizing is possible. After all, Alabama is a so-called right-to-work state, or as I like to call it, a right-to-rob worker state, with just 8% of the workers in unions. So the ballots have just been mailed to workers. Let's get an update from our friend of the show, Dave Mertz, Vice President at the RWDSU. So I thought, Dave, that I would start with a little quote that I had actually in my introduction to our chat, which I know you will find amusing. And it goes like this, quote, we believe that $15 an hour is the minimum that anyone in the U.S. should earn for an hour of labor. And that speaker, that voice then demanded that Congress raise the minimum wage. As you know, the debate is now hot about raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour. And so I asked my listeners, and where I posted it elsewhere, who do you think said that? And of course I said, people will think Senator Bernie Sanders. Well, of course, Bernie supports all that, but magically, it was Amazon. And
Yeah.
I immediately thought of our chat, because I thought that, as amusing as that is and as hypocritical as that is in the sense of the way this company has been treating its workers, it really goes to certainly what the RWDSU has been doing in terms of pressuring Amazon, not just in the organizing campaign that we're going to start talking about in a minute, but generally speaking on the question of the HQ2 headquarters and various other aspects. So don't you think this is not just by mistake that all of a sudden Amazon has found religion about the minimum wage?
I mean, listen, it's like, yay, right? It's what can you say about it? I mean, it's a fig leaf, obviously, and they'll do anything to distract from the reality of how they treat their workers. The how they deal with the communities in which they operate. The way in which they do business. I mean, folks are starting to understand that it's a huge net negative, and their PR pokes at saying that they want to do stuff to make life better for working people. Well, why not start at home?
Yeah, exactly.
Seriously,
No
I mean, they have every opportunity to do things differently, and we've been willing to engage in that conversation about how they can do things differently, and they can start right now in Alabama by respecting workers' right to organize into a union so that they can have a serious conversation with their employer about what their compensation should look like. Anybody can put out a press release,
Yep, totally. Now, I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions now about the organizing campaign. And I want to say up front, you know this, I don't want you to give away any secrets about some of the things I'm going to say. And I say that to my audience that, I'm very careful about that. And so in any aspect of this, when we're talking, you say, well, can't really talk about that, but let's, make it more general, because obviously we want the folks to be safe and secure and to feel comfortable about actually forming the union. But the first thing that struck me, Alabama would have been one of the last places I would think that you would want to start organizing Amazon, just in terms of the general political atmosphere. It's a right-to-work state, as you know. It's very lowly unionized. But tell me why I'm wrong about that, number one, and or maybe take it from the point of view, how was it that this organizing effort arose in that particular place?
Well, Jonathan, you're wrong. Is that what you wanted to hear? No.
There are many people there are many people who love to hear people say that about me. So feel free.
There you go. Add me to the list. It's a fascinating campaign. I mean, it is a locally inspired and connected campaign. The campaign came about because workers in the facility came to the union, and we have a strong presence down in that part of Alabama. We have our Mid-South Council is headquartered in Birmingham. Birmingham is right next door to Bessemer. A lot of the folks who worked in the plant know folks who are members of my union. So it was an organic conversation that began. What's fascinating too is, Bessemer itself, it's maybe not in the same way we think of places like, New York or Michigan back in its heyday, but there is a long tradition of union families in that part of Alabama. It goes back to the steelworkers, but also, there are teachers there. There are folks from different walks of life who have a connection to the labor movement or a familial connection to the labor movement. So workers in the plant were hearing from their relatives, their parents. It's a relatively young workforce, their aunts and their uncles about one way to solve your problem at work is to have union representation. So it was a very organic effort that came as a result of people wanting to have a voice, recognizing that the RWDSU is a strong voice in Alabama for workers. And that's how it began. That's really how it got moving. And in some ways, there's no better place to be when that happens. I think, another piece of this that's fueling a lot of the energy around the organizing, the workforce there is mostly African-American. I mean, a large percentage of the workforce is African-American. And there's a real sense in this moment that we need to be looking at our work lives. We need to be looking at our government, our social connections in a way that is fairer and treats people more decently and engages people and respects people regardless of race. And I think there's some of that energy is also fueling this desire on the part of the Amazon workers in Bessemer. Black Lives Matters has been a part of the conversation, and it should be. I mean, all of these things are intertwined. You can't be, for justice in one place and not in another. And so that's why when you open up with a statement by, Jeff Bezos and Amazon about $15 an hour, it just sort of, begs the question, well, why are you for decency in one place and not in another? Because you're not. That's the reality. You're not, and you're playing funny. And we want to change that. And I think we can.
And just to underscore a couple of points you made, the first one about $15 an hour, I've pointed this out a gazillion times that the $15 an hour demand is terrific given where the minimum wage is now, but it should be at least $22 an hour if you look at productivity. And it also is way below what a good, as you know, as a good union negotiator, what a good union contract would mean in terms of pay and benefits. So it's really the floor of what we should want. And you were actually telepathic to my second point that I want to follow up with you on. I wondered whether part of this beginning of the campaign, or at least perhaps the campaign started before the pandemic, but certainly got energy from both the pandemic, from Amazon making money hand over fist, given the fact that people were stuck at home and all of a sudden Amazon's business grew even faster. And in fact, Black Lives Matter, which really took off certainly in the spring when we saw uprisings everywhere. So did you see that kind of all that combination to your point before?
Yeah, there's no question about it. Certainly the pandemic has, shown a light on a lot of the problems within, Amazon's workplaces and throughout a lot of workplaces in this country, right? And the disparate treatment that people are subjected to as a result of it. There's real serious concerns about health and safety that permeate, all of Amazon's operations. And we've heard this again and again. I mean, I'm not saying anything that's new. And workers are rightly concerned that they don't have the protections and they don't have the safe conditions that they need to survive this moment in time. And it's scary. It's scary stuff. And how do you address it? How do you address these things? Well, with a collective voice. I mean, that's really the only thing that will ultimately make a difference. I think the labor movement is challenged because for so many people, that has not been a part of their experience. They don't have the personal experience with a union and a collective voice. And so you have to sort of overcome that lack of experience to be able to connect people, with the union.
especially as you point out among younger people, and that's partly a reality of the attacks against union and partly of the reality, some unions have not done a great job of reaching out to younger workers and here and there. And so when you think about how do I get justice at my workplace, how do I improve my livelihood, it takes a while for people to think through. I need to form a union.
No, absolutely. If it's not part of your experience, it does seem like a foreign notion, right? And it's hard to overcome that. But when people do understand how it works, I think they see how it could, make a difference in their lives, and that's what's happening now. You mentioned too about you have a company like Amazon, and and a man like Jeff Bezos, and the amount of wealth that they've accrued, throughout the pandemic has been astounding and frankly disturbing. And here we are talking about what minimum wages should look like, right? What should be like, should it be $15 an hour? Should it be $22 an hour? Well, shouldn't we be talking about the imbalance of power at this point in time, right? I mean, it's like you can individually address workers' concerns, and you're never actually getting at the real problem. And the problem is an extraordinary imbalance of power between workers and their employers. And what's happening here in Bessemer is we're trying to change that balance of power so that workers have the ability then to actively engage in their conditions and pay with their employer, and not just have to have it dictated from above that it's like, well, this is all you get, and you should, thank us later because we're such good people that we did this for you. You're not doing anything for anyone. These are the folks, the workers are the ones who are making this company so much money, who have made Jeff Bezos the wealthiest man in the world, does that make any sense at all? Is there any fairness or decency in that at all? No, it's ridiculous. And so we feel that the moment is here to really change that and to really have that conversation be about, what should we be aspiring to, not what we should be settling for.
Yeah, it's totally disgusting the amount of wealth that he and all these billionaires have. And we could spend the entire show talking about the ways in which the free market capitalism in our society has allowed this essentially this robbery from the sweat of workers and all the energy that folks have put in. And actually, it's a whole nother conversation. It really speaks to the rise of Donald Trump if you look at it, because for all these years, for decades, all we've heard, especially through the media, is how great these CEOs are. They're these golden boys, mostly men. And to date, Bezos has been untouched mostly. And I'm saying really up until a few years ago. And the RWDSU and some other folks have been really great at outlining and raising the point that his greed and his wealth is not only amoral, it comes at a cost to many workers. And I thought you made a really great point that I want to underscore for my audience. It's not just about wages, although that's important. It is about dignity and respect. And I don't care how much you get paid. If you get hurt in an Amazon warehouse, which happens a lot, as you quite well know, or you die, I don't care what you get paid. That ain't worth it.
Yeah, it's about everything, right? It really is. It's not just about making money. It's about how you're treated. It's about whether you're safe when you go to work. It's whether you're going to be able to go home at the end of the day, right? I mean, these are vitally important questions. It's how you're treated by your supervisors. It's how you are whether or not you have adequate time for the bathroom. I mean, it's some basic human dignity questions that don't get addressed because of that imbalance of power. And that vast wealth is being used now to try to crush workers in Alabama. So the folks in the facility are being bombarded day in and day out by an anti-union message. This is a highly professionalized anti-union message that Amazon has bought and paid for, that workers are subjected to every single day at work. They have to sit through captive audience meetings. And for your folks who may not know what that is, it's like, they are told,
please
you have to
this.
be in this meeting. It's re-education camps, Jonathan. Let's call it what it is. They have to sit in these meetings, for up to an hour at a time, sometimes several times a week. Individual workers going through, they call them union education classes. If you want a lovely euphemism there, and they just hear over and over again about all sorts of issues and problems that the company says they will have if they exercise the right to have a union. Some of which is just patently false. And we don't have the same ability to talk to workers in that way because the system that we currently have favors employers to be able to, really control that conversation, so that, we're fighting against that. And it's like, that should be addressed, more, globally for our country. I mean, is this the kind of system that we really want? But for us right now, it's just something that we're confronting on the ground as we're talking to workers, and it creates a challenging environment. It's David versus Goliath, but we're not backing down.
I think this is really an important point that I want to underscore. And if you want to elaborate after I make a couple points about this, that to my audience, and many folks in my audience are union activists or union members, they know this. But I want to say this to folks who perhaps don't know this, that if you look at the support for unions over the past many decades, it really has not changed if you look at kind of polling, to the extent you want to believe in polling. The reality of why the labor movement principally has shrunk, mostly in the private sector, is this multi-billion-dollar industry that's whole purpose is to destroy unions. There's these very sophisticated law firms that have whole departments that are just devoted to destroy unions. And companies like Amazon have unlimited resources, and they go to every extent to terrorize workers who want to speak up. And I often use this analogy of trying to create a scenario in someone's mind. Think of if this was a contest between two people running for president of the United States. And let's call this person Mr. Red. And Mr. Red was able to campaign throughout the United States every single day and talk to every single voter. And Mr. Blue, who was running against Mr. Red, could only talk to voters by standing on the other side of the border, say in Mexico, or floating on a boat in the ocean, meaning Mr. Red had complete access to every single voter, could shake his or her hand, have captive meetings in the way you described it. Mr. Blue had to kind of shout from the outside. And that's kind of a little bit of the analogy of what you guys face, not just you, but any union organizing campaign. The company controls the inside of the workplace, and it makes it very hard, given the labor laws, which are so pathetic, to actually be able to talk to people in a way that's free of intimidation.
As a condition of your job, you have to listen to your employer's propaganda. As a condition of your job, you've got no choice but to listen to what they have to say. And it's not just that particular moment when they're talking to you in meetings. They're also, able to, and which they're doing at the Amazon facility, have all sorts of misinformation, posters that are up throughout the facility. They have video screens playing anti-union messages. Even in the bathroom, when people went to go to the bathroom, when you closed the stall door, Jonathan, there was an anti-union poster on the stall door. You could not escape it. I mean, it's 1984 stuff. They're just trying to manipulate their workforce, and they've got every opportunity to do so, and they've got every dollar to be able to make it happen. And it really is a terrible system where, as you described, we are forced then to try to connect with workers at a great disadvantage to what the employer can do. And still, workers are saying they want union representation. You mentioned something about polling. The actual polling on whether or not people think favorably of unions or would want a union has gotten better for unions over the last 10 years. So that right now, unions are viewed more favorably than they have been in some time. But because of that imbalance of power, because of that industry of anti-union consultants and attorneys, and a legal system that is easily manipulated by these folks to both slow down union campaigns and to derail union campaigns, unions find themselves at a disadvantage. Even with that being said, workers continue to seek out union representation, particularly at this moment, because I think when people really talk about it and really understand what's going on, it's just like almost an oh duh kind of moment. Of course that would work. Of course collective power would work in challenging our employer and in creating a better work environment.
And I just want to make one side note again to my audience. My audience knows that I've been extremely critical of the Democratic Party on this podcast and for a very long time. But you have to think of it in two ways. we can be critical of the party, but also recognize that this is one area where it does matter who runs the show in Washington, because as you well know, when it comes to trying to at least get some justice within the labor laws, which is very difficult. Again, I'm saying this to my audience. You're a veteran organizer and negotiator, so you know this. It's even hard to organize on a good day within the labor laws that exist, but at least when you have a National Labor Relations Board and that's more favorable to workers, which we now have in Washington, and when you have adjudication of unfair labor practices, when companies like Amazon try to intimidate and break the law, when you have a somewhat better process, it does help a little bit make it possible for folks to organize a union. Now, the most important thing, obviously, is the courage of the workers and the organization of the folks who are really leading this campaign. And so I'm wondering, without, again, giving away any secrets, what are you seeing that's particularly unique, if there is something unique, that the organizers, the core organizing committee is doing that gives you, I assume, a lot of hope that you're going to do well?
Yeah, I think the energy alone on the ground, is inspiring. And that, even despite the odds against workers and the constant, messaging from their employer, we still have a tremendous amount of support, and workers are standing up and they're speaking out and then saying, they want to have union representation. That alone, Jonathan, is inspiring. I think this particular moment, you're absolutely right. With the Biden administration, we are going to have, a better labor board. We're going to have, better decisions being made. But even within the context of better, it's still really not good enough, because our laws allow things to take place that they should not allow. And in particular, it's like, I think the captive audience meetings alone are disturbing, and it really, I would like to think that we would be trying to address that kind of imbalance in this process, so that workers can actually make a fair decision on whether or not they want to have a union. And I'm hoping that we'll get to that place, but a lot of work needs to be done. I think the election alone of President Biden, and the fact that, was it just a couple of days ago, they tweeted out that they're pro-union. They believe that workers should have a union voice. We've got letters of support that have been signed by, a dozen senators and countless Congress people saying that, the Alabama Amazon workers, should vote for a union. I mean, it's a really important moment where, you're seeing a bit of a change culturally in how we're embracing the labor movement. And I understand, some of the critiques that have been leveled against the Democratic Party, in particular, for how they've dealt with the labor movement over the years. Sometimes they haven't fully embraced the labor movement or done as much as they could have done to, make organizing easier. I'm hoping, and I think we are in a different moment where there's an understanding that this imbalance has to be addressed. And the only way to do it is through strengthening the labor movement. And that's not just good for unions, and it's not just good for workers, it's good for our economy, it's good for our democracy, and it's good for our country.
And I want to say, I think that's a testament, perhaps the different mood, a testament from the other side, from the union side and the folks that support unions and are doing community organizing. The party, the Democratic Party, is changing because of the pressure they're feeling from the grassroots, from people going out, Black Lives Matter, from the uprisings that are happening everywhere. Because let's face it, the Democratic Party is still, in my view, in the hold of corporate interest too much, and still too much supports the free market and capitalism and all that stuff. But what's really happening is they're realizing, from a political standpoint, for the party to be successful, they have to be out there supporting unions and supporting these kind of organizing campaigns. So it's always hard to know what the outcome is going to be. The ballots just went out. People are going to get them. How are you feeling, without predicting? We're not going to put a bet here in Vegas, but how are you feeling generally?
I think after the Super Bowl, I learned not to be putting bets on anything right about now, Jonathan. So we learned a valuable lesson there.
Well, I don't watch the Super Bowl, so there would have been a better lesson for you. But I do buy lottery tickets, so there's my weakness. Go ahead.
There you go. Look, I think it's an extraordinary moment. I really do. And I don't want to make any predictions, but no matter what the outcome is, this is an extremely important campaign for what it says about the moment in which we're in, and for what it says about the willingness of workers to stand up, and for what it says about the problems that workers face both during the pandemic and just every day generally. I think you've seen a lot of this stuff in high relief. The just the disturbing conditions under which people have to work, the fear that workers have in having to work during a pandemic, and thinking that maybe their employer doesn't necessarily care about them as people and only cares about making money, regardless of what it actually means to these individuals. And that's vitally important. I don't think that goes away. I don't think an individual organizing campaign, the outcome changes what that has started. And I think that if we get to a point where workers win their fight, it's an amazing thing, right? It would be the first time that Amazon, warehouse workers have a union voice in the United States. It would be extraordinary. But if for whatever reason it doesn't get to that point, it's still an incredible fight that was taken on against incredible odds. And it's an important conversation to keep on having. So it's like, no matter what the outcome, I hope, Jonathan, that we continue to talk about this campaign and we continue to talk about this effort. Because I know, for one, my union is not going away. We've been talking about this for a while, about the need to change Amazon. We're going to continue to talk about it. And, until we actually get to a point where we feel that we've gotten the kind of country and system that working people deserve.
And when are the results going to be known?
Yeah, so the ballots are out now. They were mailed out on February 8th. They have to be back by March 29th, and then some point after we'll have an idea of what transpired. So stay tuned.
Well, whatever happens, we're going to have you and perhaps some of the workers or organizers back in the show to give us either an update in between or when we know the results. And more power to you guys. Good luck, and thanks for being on the show.
Thank you, Jonathan. And all the thanks goes to our folks down in Alabama. What an extraordinary group of people. They've got heart, they've got smart, they've got it all, and they're making it happen. So we're just happy to be able to do whatever we can to support what they're doing. And thank you so much, man, for giving us a moment to speak about this and to give voice to some of this stuff.